All righty. Hello, Internet, and welcome to another episode of the outstanding Macabre Monthly. Yay.
Yay!
I am Matt Orozco, and I'm joined with the always amazing and lovely.
Lowell Greenblatt. How's it going?
It's going well. It's going well. It is almost the summertime, which means it's short season, also means it's sweat season. Um, I sweat a lot for just how an average person. So this is always my
Same.
least favorite time of year for that, but also I enjoy the fact that it's not 10 degrees outside and you have to be bundled in 5 layers to exist. So yeah, no
Yeah.
complaints.
I'm a big sandals guy, so it's my time, but I'm also a big sweat guy. So it's about time to put the air conditioners in.
Yeah, I know. I've where we live now, we currently the AC and heating is all one, which is great normally when it works, but it has just not been working. So I hope they get that fixed before it gets real hot here in Cleveland, or else it's going to be a sticky summer, that's for sure.
Good luck.
Yeah, but on the note of sticky summers, we are talking about mental health and horror because May is Mental Health Awareness Month and something that's I feel comfortable saying near and dear to both of our hearts, something that matters.
Mhm.
And as such, we figured we would talk about what are 5 movies that got mental health right in horror, because there's been a lot of movies that use mental health as a metaphor to expand upon the horror, but I don't think all of them actually succeed in doing that. Like trauma has become the buzzword of horror over the past 2 years, but I don't know if anyone actually knows what trauma means in this context, in the clinical sense, and how we're applying it to horror. So we thought we'd give a shot at picking out ones that actually get it right or close to right, or and at the same time are pretty good damn horror movies as well.
Or at least don't feel exploitative. Maybe for some people with those conditions, they might think the films here and there are exploiting their condition, but at least these are ones that I felt like showed it in a positive light that I really enjoyed
Yeah,
personally.
yeah, we could talk about the separation anxiety between conjoined twins and basket case, but I really don't think that that was the point Henenlotter was trying to make around mental
Yeah.
health as much. He just wanted to make a fucked up movie about a fucking
Also, we could talk about how Sleepaway Camp is probably unintentionally one of the most pro-trans movies ever made, but that's absolutely not the intention of the people who made it. I don't think even to be anti-trans really, but that's a whole nother episode. But watching that movie through a modern lens is wild in a
yeah.
surprisingly good way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it is kind of funny how like the accidental positivity emerges from some of the misogyny. In the case of Sleepaway Camp, pedophilia. There's just so much happening in that movie that makes you question why, but then occasionally there's something that you get right. It's like, well, I guess a broken clock is right twice a day. So
Yeah.
there is
So,
there's light in the dark, as they say. But
yeah.
as we always start these things, Lowell, what have you been watching?
I realized from last time we never, I don't know if we did this before it came out, but we never talked about Evil Dead Rise.
No, we didn't, and I had it on my list to talk about with you because I know we
Yeah.
share some. We might share the sentiment on this, but we never had a full on discussion about it.
So, good news. There still has not been a bad Evil Dead film,
True.
but it's not a great Evil Dead film. I'm like, there's enough for me to drag it to 3 stars instead of 2.5, but it really skirts that 2.5. I mean, so I just said I liked it, but what was the point of that framing device? Like, you know, if you just like cut to the building after that intro, which I don't want to ruin, you've seen in the trailers, then that would be disorienting and you sort of get it at the end. But because of the timestamp, it's like, oh, well, I kind of know what to expect now. Why did that even happen? And it's set in LA, but they're the most New Zealand actors I've ever seen. Like you couldn't have tried to take off the accent just a little bit harder throughout the, but small potatoes. Alyssa Sutherland as the mother, whose name I even forgot, maybe the best actress to play a Deadite in any of these films. I'd have to rack my brain for Ash versus Evil Dead, but holy shit, she was great. Um, and I felt the specific callbacks to the other Evil Dead films, not like the new mythologies with the book and the things we usually expect, but the some shots, the come get some was just
The
like,
Dead by Dawn.
yeah, it's just like let's
Stop
not
winking at me movie.
yeah, and like Fede Alvarez showed us that you can do an Evil Dead movie without Bruce Campbell and without a lot of things that we associate with the previous trilogy. But this one was just kind of trying to have its cake and eat it too. And ultimately, I did I did like it tentatively, but like you're on watch Evil Dead franchise.
Yeah.
That's what I'm gonna say. Some great gore too. Just the gore is never an issue.
No, but I actually like, and I agree with everything you just said. The only thing I would add to it is that it it kind of I agree with the framing device being just shitty. And I also think it's a trend that needs to go away. Like, stop telling us what's going to happen and then going backwards. Like that's just it's like the kind of thing that just gets, it's like a cold open. It only works if everything else around it supports it. But it felt like it was almost tacked on there to try and create some sense of continuity beyond this entry. And I think what's always made the Evil Dead movies so successful is that they kind of throw away tradition in a lot of ways because they don't have any sort of linearity to them. Like Evil Dead to Evil Dead 2, it's Evil Dead 2 is a remake of Evil Dead. It's just a funny
Yeah,
one and a slapstick one, and then Army of Darkness is just what happens if we put this character in a totally different environment, and then you get the 2013, which is, taking a much more grounded approach to the material, and it works. And then you have the TV show, which was all about just like bringing back that Evil Dead 2 sentiment, but bringing it into a new generation. And again, it worked because how can you go wrong with that type of humor and that type of character just existing in this world where Deadites exists and his sole responsibility is to fucking kill them? So Bruce Campbell is such a gravitational pull of energy and interest that even watching him on a screen doing something he did 30, 40 years ago, it's still as entertaining as it was. But there is parts of Evil Dead Rise that it feels kind of like Rob Zombie's Halloween, in that if you were to take away Evil Dead, it probably would get a lot, it would be viewed more favorably in my mind because it just doesn't have to be beholden to these things.
yeah,
And I get the sense that maybe it might have been not an Evil Dead movie, and then they just decided to throw Evil Dead on it at some point. And the
I can see
more
that.
the problem I have with it at large, because it is a fun movie once it gets going, it again bucks a trend with most Evil Dead movies in that they tend to start pretty fast. Like you have about 10 to 15 minutes of lead in before shit hits the fan, whereas this had about 30 minutes before things really start to go start to actually happen. But for all of the priding itself on how gory it was, how many times are you going to cut away from the money shots? Like, how many times are you not going to show like that drone scene in the beginning? Why aren't you showing that? Show us that. Like, that's what we're here to see. And then hyping up the cheese grater scene, which for all of but 1 millisecond of a shot.
You
Um,
saw it in the trailer. Yeah,
it's just I think that, and I find that the problem at large with franchises today is that we exist in stan culture, which essentially means that you either love or you hate something, but you can't just be okay on it. And so people see Evil Dead Rise, and I will defend. I could totally see if I was 22 years old, 16 years old, going to see this in theaters as being like one of my first like real like gruesome horror experiences in a theater. I could totally see myself loving it and thinking it's fucking amazing because everyone's had that movie where like I can't, like when I saw American Psycho in the theater, I'm like, holy shit, I cannot believe I'm seeing this in a theater. This feels wrong. So I feel like I don't want to degrade the opinions of those who found a lot of worth in it. But I think the biggest problem with it now is that you either love or you hate something, and you can't just like all the reviews for this were like, "Oh my god, it's so amazing! OMG, it's the best thing we've
Yeah,
ever
that
seen."
also didn't help that it was so overhyped.
And
But
like at the
enough.
end of the day, like it's a good movie. It's a in fact, if you take away the
Yeah.
hype, it's probably just as good as like it's a solid horror movie. And I don't
No.
want to take away the flowers from Cronin or the cast, but I just think that the marketing ultimately gets the better of these films in a way that doesn't do them any good, and it
Mhm.
sets an expectation that's almost impossible to meet. So and then people get really upset when you don't like something that they love, and so all of a sudden it becomes like, well, if you didn't like Evil Dead Rise, blah blah blah, you're not a great true horror fan, you're not true fans. So I think that we and it's that's why the future of horror is on places like Shudder, right? Because that's where franchises don't go to thrive, that's where new ideas go to exist. But it is not a terrible movie. They're certainly not going to be my best movie of 2023 so far. I think Malum has that pretty much locked in, until I see something better. But I'm glad that it's doing well. I hope that they take notes for if because there will be a sequel, I'm sure. I hope that they, kind of take this almost prey approach of let's just put the fucking Necronomicon in different points of time and see how people react to it.
Yeah. Fine. Hmm.
Like that's how Evil Dead's always existed best. Is like sure the character of Ash is as iconic, but the second that Fede Alvarez took Ash out of the equation and made it his own, I think he set the tone for what Evil Dead could be. And this somewhat reinforces that to the extent that also big bugaboo with this movie. It's an LA apartment that looks nothing like a fucking LA apartment. Like
It
it's fucking huge, first
could
of
have been
all.
any. Yeah.
Yeah, like there's nothing LA about this, which is why setting horror movies in really big cities is very difficult because oftentimes you can't ever capture the essence of a city that large, unless you're focusing on something very specific like the San Fernando Valley, or like Venice or something like that. But even still, small gripe. Glad it did well. Glad it made money. Hope it makes more, and I'm sure we'll see more of them.
Yeah. I also watched Outpost, which I reviewed for the site, which is the debut directorial effort from Jolo Trulio, he of The State, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Wet Hot American Summer. And I mean, you know his face. You've
Funniest
seen
bit
him.
character of all time.
The what?
Funniest character actor of all time. Like he's always got the best lines. And what is
What?
it? I Love You, Man. Plays like the workout enthusiast with like a slight lisp. Amazing, just amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Best episode of Party Down. Drawn. Yeah, so he is following in the footsteps of other comedians and making a horror movie.
Nice.
This one is more like a psychological thriller uh, with isolation about a woman who's been abused who takes a job as a fire watcher at an outpost in the Idaho mountains. Um, and what she really needs is not to take a government job at the moment, but rather to go to therapy. And things kind of shine on from there. That's my Shining reference. But you know, hey, I mentioned in my review, if you watch a lot of horror movies, you may have some idea of where it's going. But it it gets there. It gets there in a very surprising and satisfying way. It's not the kind of film you think would have an effects budget, but it does. Um, and it stars Beth Dover, the comedian, and also Joe Trulio's wife and frequent co-star. And it's got a lot of really good actors in it. He pulled in some good folks, and yeah, it's not bad. I don't know if it'll make my favorite list for the year. I mean, I don't. We're not that deep into 2023, but it feels kind of like at this point in 2022, we were already salivating with all the stuff that we got. So
Yeah.
we should just go easy on this tier. But it's not bad, and Lo Trulio definitely has a bright future as a director and genre if he wants it. And I got to interview him, and it was just supposed to be for like a certain time limit, but he was like, I can go longer. And he did. And we did. We just talked horror and screenwriting. And I'm like, can't fucking believe this guy is talking to me. Like,
So awesome.
uh, yeah, it was totally awesome. Um,
We love you,
yeah,
Joe.
so yeah, hell yeah, son. That was Outpost, and I also on the plane down to New Orleans for my honeymoon, I watched Halloween Ends because there weren't a lot of. I rewatched Halloween Ends. There weren't a lot of choices, but I'm like, still like it. Still has problems. Still way outside the box. I feel like I'm going to be thinking about that movie for the rest of my horror loving life, and not in a bad way. So
You
yeah,
know, I have
that's
a really bad habit of watching the most inappropriate things on airplanes and like not realizing I'm doing it. It's like I watched like the first episode of Dead Ringers from Amazon on a plane. And I don't know if you've watched it, but there are like very realistic birthing scenes in there. And it's like 7 o'clock in the morning on this flight, and I'm just like sitting there with my fucking Biscoff cookie, sipping my coffee, watching birthing videos through Dead Ringers on my laptop, just hoping and just not realizing for the longest time that I don't know who's around me, but you know what? I hope they don't care.
yeah. My wife's afraid of dolls, and on the flight back yesterday, the person like in front of her to the left, like so that she could see her screen peripherally, like out of the corner of her eye without looking, was watching Megan. And she was just like trying to watch her movie like this. Like she couldn't help but see Megan. And I'm like, sorry. So
Oh,
yeah. I
terrifying.
will Ed Ringers though. I hear it's great. And yeah, I think that's about it for what I've seen. What about yourself?
I got a few things. So checked out Sisu a while back, which kind of horror adjacent, I guess, but super violent, super fun. Um, it's not a perfect film, but it is very good at what it's trying to do, which is just show one guy kicking a bunch of Nazi ass in the most violent possible way. You know,
That's all I
reality
need.
be damned. It's almost like a graphic novel come to life because of just how kind of absurd some of the violence gets, but highly entertaining. I think it's out on VOD now, and I think we have a 4K coming out pretty soon, which I
Mm-hmm.
believe both of us will be picking up. So high recommend on that one. Another one that's coming out tomorrow called Cracked, which I think is a 2022 film, but is getting some VOD love now. If you like supernatural horror movies from Southeast Asia, you're going to definitely love this one. I feel like in fact, as someone who doesn't like supernatural horror movies generally, like they're not my favorite. I don't dislike them, but it's certainly like tertiary subgenre to me. Um, I think the Southeast Asian folks get supernatural horror far better than any other part of the world because there's always some sort of super like malicious reason why these spirits exist, and it's always kind of fucked up. And so Cracked definitely has elements of that, and it's a nice breezy like 87 minutes. Um, so high recommend there. Couple other things. I checked out Cocaine Bear, which
Oh,
um not that good. It's not bad, but it's also just I guess I didn't
it's
have
fine.
much of an expectation. Yeah, it's fine. But like I think Elizabeth Banks is a very talented director. I think she did a very good job directing what no one would have ever thought would ever be a feature-length film. And I think there was pretty serviceable like job taking this story, this basically headline and turning it into a full-on narrative. That said, it can't decide whether it wants to be a comedy or not. It definitely is trying to be funny. Um, but yeah, not terrible, not great, kind of forgettable. Like I kind of forgot I saw it actually the day after. I was like, oh, I should watch Cocaine Bear. Wait a minute, I watched that. Um,
Kind of feels like an 80s, like almost like a John Candy or Chevy Chase kind of movie, just like with some really gory, violent shit thrown in there, you
yeah,
know?
like the great outdoors with Carnage.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, I will say, that ambulance scene was one of my favorites of the year, I think. Like, holy shit. It's worth it to see it on Peacock just for that.
I mean, I actually think I actually would give Cocaine Bear a recommend if you're just looking for something that like the laundry folding movie, you're
Yeah.
not paying full attention, but you just have enough attention paid to it. It's perfect for that. kind of checking your phone while you watch kind of experience. And last thing was I rewatched Martyrs from 2008, and I've come to the realization that I think it might be the most important horror movie since of 2000s and beyond. Um,
How, like, if for how influential it is.
I think it took what so I think that the thematic elements of Martyrs I wasn't able to appreciate because I've only seen it 3 times. This is my third time seeing it. First time I saw it, there was like a 10-year gap between the first time and the second time because I didn't want to see it again. Like I liked it, but I'm like, I don't need to watch that
Yeah,
again.
one done kind of. I'm like that with Inside, by Maureen
Yeah.
Bustiu. But I mean, honestly, if you drop a 4K of that, I have to get it. But even now, it's on my list on Shutter, and I'm like, can I do this? I
Do
know
I
it's
want
for do this. Yeah,
but I think that like the thing about Martyrs is one, I forgot the first half of the movie existed. Like totally remember the second half, totally forgot the first. But also the thematic elements underpinning Martyrs are pretty fucking profound. How wealthy people take advantage of the vulnerable simply to um for shits and gigs, basically. Like they're trying to
well,
prove
no, this
something.
is a deeply held. Well, I don't want to ruin it, but like they believe in something. Like it's like a cult. It's like, they're doing it for a reason. As crazy as that reason is.
But they never they but it's like that's my point is like they're doing it for a reason, but the reason is to accomplish this, like to create a martyr. It's not necessarily like and find out the meaning of life, whatever, right? It's like, and at this point, if you haven't seen Martyrs, I'm not spoiling shit because that's not even the juice is certainly not in just that squeeze. But like that, it's almost like they're just doing it because it's been done before. They show those pictures of the other people that have been martyred. It's like they're proving something that's already been proven just to say that they can, and because they have the means and ability to do so. And I think there's so much more to it than that we don't have time to get into today. But I also find that like the violence works because of how brutal it is, but also it's less flinching. Like it's not, it doesn't hit you the same on a rewatch as it was the first time, which allows you to kind of pay attention to some of the more metaphorical parts of the movie. I don't know. I think it, and I just think it's important. I think the reason I make such a bold claim on it is because it's one of the more original pieces of horror that I can think of as far as the plot's concerned. Like, there's nothing else like that, as far as I'm aware of or can think of the top of my head. Like, that story that they're trying to tell is very unique. The way it's executed is flawless. It doesn't stop. Like, the movie literally, once the shotgun scene happens at the beginning, it just goes until the end. Um, and it's just really well made. It's a very well made movie. Like it's perfectly paced, great, interesting characters. Um, so yeah, I think it's really amazing. It's an amazing movie that I always think about, and I don't know, it grows on me every time I watch it. So
I still think about it. I'd also recommend Ghostland or Incident in the Ghostland for the
it's a good
American
one.
title. Um, the two films later, the director made after this, and it's slightly more hopeful without ruining anything. Like easy to see at a certain point. Have you seen it? I don't want
Yeah,
to ruin
it's a little bit more. I don't like it as much
hopeful.
because it's not as focused, but it also is like in the cut from the same cloth.
Yeah, but for me, for Martyrs, I feel like it's like the last torture porn movie because it's not even really a torture porn movie. There is torture in it, of course, but it's sort of like the last word on it. It's like
Yeah.
this guy was watching all this like post Saw shit that was coming out, and he's like, "No, I have a movie like that, but it's not that I can make." And like, you ever see like something so like a film? I know we sort of talked about this with a Serbian film, but like, I know you say a Serbian film is just like, oh, they're just kind of fucking with us, yeah, under the guise of having something to say. I think Martyrs act like, for as crazy and demented as it does have something that the director wants to say, and it is a film made by an insane person who doesn't want to rise out of you. He wants to take you there,
Yep.
and I think he does. And I'm like, I'll watch anything. Pascal Lagier, I think his name
Yeah.
is. Like, just I just gotta respect like the commitment to the abyss with Martyrs and where it goes at the end. Like,
It's like
my
Gaspar Noé. It's like they're so committed to the nihilistic vision that it doesn't give you any reprieve from it. And it's so genuine in that way. And so while it's not an enjoyable watch in the sense that you're given hope or some sort of, satisfying conclusion, it's more there's a really clear intention that this isn't like the violence is brutal and visceral, but that's not the point of the movie. The violence is the means to illustrate the point. And the point, and there's so many points to be had, like the idea of believing people that have been experienced trauma, and how belief can change based on how someone's mentality changes. And there's just everything about it. It's so the French New Wave of extremism that happened around this time. The other movie's getting a release from Second Sight is Frontiers, which is very similar. Those movies like High Tension around the same time, although much less successful in its landing. I These movies like they're more than the brutal violence as much as they're just sometimes really good examples of like how to elevate horror in a way that makes it scary again and makes it like somewhat unsafe. And I think that you lose that safety jacket when you watch Martyrs because there's nothing there to tell you that this is okay. And then you think about how it applies to the broader world. You're like, shit, it's right. I don't like to admit that it's right, but it's fucking right. So
yeah.
we really need a 4K of Martyrs is what I'm trying to say. Because I don't think you can get it in the US. It's only my Blu-rays from Germany or something like that, or the UK.
Maybe DVD, but I don't think it's on Blue over here.
No. Well, that's what we've been watching. As we always do, let's check out some news. As should be apparent at this point, we are a part of Macabre Daily, hence the Macabre Monthly. And
Oh yeah.
oh yeah, that old chestnut. So yeah, check out our site, macabredaily.com. I've cherry picked some news from the past month. There's been a lot of Beetlejuice 2 casting news. I think we have Monica Bellucci, Jenna Ortega, Willem Dafoe, Michael Keaton, Winona Ryder, Catherine O'Hara, Danny Elfman's coming back. Is this thing just doomed to fail or like what? I don't know.
I just can't believe it's real. I wasn't too hot on Wednesday.
No.
I thought that Jen Ortega was great, Gwendolyn Christie, like everyone was pretty good, at least. But I hope to God that this is Tim Burton going back to the well a little bit. Because for my money, he hasn't made a truly great film since Sleepy Hollow, and he's made some good ones since then. But like, if we could sort of go back to that era, I mean, I just hope it doesn't suck.
Do you
Like when
think Michael Keaton still got it though? Because that's the part I'm like a little worried about is like that
I
performance he turns in is I don't know if you can get that nuts. You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts. Like how are you gonna get that nuts again?
I mean, he was funny in The Good Guys, which came out like 10 years ago. But yeah, I mean, you know what? If it's not a cash grab, if it's for real, let's do it. Because Hocus Pocus 2, I always said it doesn't have to be. Before it came out, we're all like crossing our fingers. I was like, it doesn't have to be good. It just doesn't have to suck.
That's right.
Just be passable, and that's fine. And I actually really enjoyed Hocus Pocus 2. It might even be better as a movie than the original. So that's sort of what I'm hoping for. It's
Yeah.
I still can't even believe it's happening, but let it happen.
Yeah. I'm we'll see. I'm holding out any sort of we've got a long time for this thing to come out. So I hope that we get less news. But I could never do with enough news about what we do in the shadows, which is premiering on
Oh my
July
god.
13th. This is, for my money, the funniest show on television. I will not
Yeah.
hear anything else. I don't know what else is this funny. And it's going in its fifth season. And it gets better every season. I don't know how it
I
happens.
still can't believe it's in its fifth season already. I feel like the movie just came out. But yeah, like I mean, it's not running out of gas anytime soon. 10 seasons in a movie. probably the best half hour on TV. I
Hands
mean,
down.
comedy wise, because, well, I mean, Barry's a comedy and a drama, but yeah, What We Do in the Shadows, we can't get enough of it.
No, no, it's I will. I know eventually there will be a day where this will either cease or will cease to be funny. But until then, I'm rooting for it every step of the way. And
Here,
Jackie
here.
Daytona will ride again. Um, so
Yeah.
we got a sequel to Silent Hill coming out. What are your thoughts on the original Silent Hill?
Uh, well, you forgot about Return to Silent Hill from about 10 years ago, but so did everyone else because it was terrible. Um,
I totally did forget about it. I never seen
yeah,
it, never saw it either.
I think I saw it on Netflix, but it was, ugh. But no, I remember really liking the first one. And I never played the game. I played Resident Evil, but I was just, once again, it's a video game movie. How is this going to go? Because they don't have the best track record, and I didn't quite understand some of the mythology that they laid out. But I remember thinking at the time, I think this is as good as video game movies are going to be. Which is to say, I liked it. Not perfect. I certainly wasn't expecting a sequel, but you know, if this is a sequel made by the same people who made the first one, I'm absolutely curious. Like, yeah, let's
It
go
looks to
back.
be like kind of with Christoph Gans at the helm. That's at least somewhat comforting from continuity perspective. I think I actually like the Silent Hill movie quite a bit. The games aren't the games get a lot of credit for being better than they actually are. Especially the first one. It's not very good, but the second one's amazing.
Yeah,
Um,
that's what I heard. The second one is like some people's favorite horror game of all time.
because it's genuinely like there's parts and like it feels the way a horror game's supposed to feel, where you're kind of uneasy about what's happening next, and it feels very unpredictable. And it sounds like this is going to be focused on the game two storyline or the second game's storyline, which is a good news for the plot. Um, I think my only issue with the original Silent Hill movie was just the way it ended. It felt a bit kind of unnecessarily big, but you can't shake some of the great visuals that they had, like the pyramid head and the nurses. I mean, some
Oh yeah,
genuinely great makeup effects in that movie.
truly.
So I'm actually pretty excited for this. At least eager to see what they come up with. And it looks like another Disney icon is getting the old IP treatment here with Cinderella's Curse.
Is it in
Um,
public domain at this point?
it might
Cinderella.
be, might be. It could also be. I don't know if Cinderella is a uniquely Disney take either. I think that might be a Grimm fairy tale, but don't quote me
Oh
here.
yeah, right. Okay.
And I don't know where
Uh,
those rest on the IP copyright law side of things. But hey, if there's ever a movie that needs a gross retelling, why not Cinderella?
that Yeah, I don't care. I
Did you
just
see Pooh, a little Blood and Honey?
I did not. I don't think I'm going to. Honestly, I mean, maybe if it lands on Tubi one day and I'm bored, but just no. Just it's these are the most naked cash grabs. They're so naked, they're not even wearing skin. They're the Cenobite cash grabs.
Just the Frank from Hellraiser of cash grabs, just looking around for
Yeah,
some skin.
yeah. Disney wept. So yeah. But you know what? If
Mickey
you like,
wept and just pulls them apart.
yeah, if you like these movies, enjoy.
Yeah, I have not seen Blood and Honey yet, but I would like to check it out just to see what they come up with. But yeah, who knows? This could be good, could be terrible, maybe something in between. But you know what is maybe terrible, maybe great is James Cameron's making another Terminator movie, writing another Terminator movie. Um,
Okay, so real quick, Terminator 2 is one of my favorite films of all time. I think it's nearly perfect.
it's a masterpiece.
Um, to to the point where I go to see every new Terminator film that comes out in the theaters every weekend, every first weekend, because to me the ending is so perfect and it puts such a fine cap on it that I am so ready to accept every other film in the Terminator franchise as fan fiction, and I watch it as fan fiction, and I can enjoy it as fan fiction. There are only two Terminator films. They are directed by James Cameron, and the rest are kind of cool little what ifs that all have redeeming qualities to one end or another. Um, and which, is a blessing and a curse. I think at this point, if anyone else may, no one but James Cameron should be making a Terminator film, writing, directing, or otherwise, unless it's like a full-on reboot. But if he wants to take another crack at it, I would love to see what he thinks of Terminators in the year of our Lord 2023. Because at the time, I mean, it's still a relevant story, especially with AI and Chat GPT. Like, it's never not going to be relevant. He just came at it at a time where, it was, you thought Skynet was just one big mainframe sitting in some lab somewhere, as opposed to the software that AI is now. So, if he wants to do it to make sure Terminator feels a little more relevant, I don't think he needs to. I don't think anyone needs to touch this franchise ever again unless it's a total reboot. Schwarzenegger's done with it. But you know what? Fine. I mean, Avatar Way of Water had no business being that good.
I
Like
still haven't
it's
seen
almost
it.
like it's Cameron still got it, man. Like I couldn't believe it.
Did you like the first Avatar movie though?
I enjoyed it. I mean, I recognize it was just Pocahontas, but honestly, Way of Water doesn't feel like he's just grafting like an old plot onto some shiny new effects.
Yeah.
Like they're the lines of the dull, annoying lines of dialogue that are just there to get the point, to move from one scene to the next, which littered the first Avatar, aren't in the Way of Water. I highly recommend Way of Water because I couldn't believe how much I enjoyed it. So he's still got it. He's still got it. So let him have it.
I just really hope it's not like the Terminator on the Titanic because I feel like he's just going to start mashing up the things he loves the most. Um,
There's a lot of water in the Way of Water. I will say, you can tell that he wants to go back to the water. So
whatever you
Aqua
call those
Terminator,
aquaphiles or something like that. But
yeah,
yeah,
whatever. I think it's
I don't
so.
know. I am less I am less excited about Cameron as a filmmaker now because I think once you reach a point where nobody tells you no anymore, it's very difficult to create um like it's just I think you need people to push back. And I think Cameron's at a point in his career where who's gonna do that? Who's gonna push back? Be like, that's not a good idea.
Uh, I totally agree with you, and I think Exhibit A is Quentin Tarantino.
Yep.
Um, but it's it's a long ass movie, but I'm telling you, Way of Water is the proof in the pudding. Not a
I will
perfect film, means, but like he has such sights to show us still. And I mean, I mean, do you know who's in it from the first movie? Like, okay, I won't ruin it for you, but there's like, see it and then we'll talk because
okay.
we have to. Yeah,
Because I was very like uh very like cold on Avatar, and I'm like, this is what you were waiting to show everybody. Fern Gully, but live action.
this is not that. This it is not the story of Fern Gully this time.
Yeah,
But that was just table dressing for this. So
but he does get cred for making two of the best action sci-fi movies of all time, three of the best action sci-fi movies of all time. So
mm,
I'm not willing to throw the baby out with the bathwater on this one, but So we'll see. It'll. You
Yeah.
are right. If anyone can save this franchise at this point, it's probably him or
Mhm.
somebody who's never seen any of the Terminator movies and just does their own thing. But
Yeah.
anyway,
I'm fine with them letting it die. But
yeah.
yeah. Anyway.
Well, that's the news. On to our topic at hand. Best, most accurately depicted mental health horror movies. I don't know what the catchy way to say that is. So, just curious, Lowell, how did you approach this as far as thinking about your list? What are some of the hallmarks or criteria you use to assess quality and
Uh,
accuracy?
I mean, honestly, I even think I got a few of them wrong. I mean, I know one that definitely belongs on here, but some of them I just thought maybe characters with mental illness where I feel like they're being written and or directed by someone who knows what they're talking about a little bit, either from living with someone with that illness or having that illness themselves, or at least like even if they're showing a sort of illness that they're not associated with, it's like it's not a portrayal that makes me roll my eyes or go like, oh, you just want, you're not simple jacking all over the place, you know you're not being a radio here. It's like you're trying though. Yeah, I don't even know if some of these qualify as mental health, but that's what I tried to go with. What
Yeah, I
about
think I
you?
took a similar approach of just trying to figure out which one of these I think doesn't, like we talked about at the beginning, doesn't really exploit that, where it kind of exploit is an example of a movie that doesn't end up on my list because of how poorly it like characterizes multiple personality disorder. Like, just doesn't, it's not really how that works. But to that end, like looking at it as an entertaining film is totally different viewpoint. So as an entertaining movie, Split's great. As an accurate portrayal of multiple personality disorder, absolutely not. Like, not even close. But I think that there are movies that have done a good job of straddling the line between fact and fiction in a way where the fact is authentic to the mental health metaphor and the fiction is very much centered in the horror, and that they're not, yucking their yum too much. So um, yeah, it was a lot harder to do than I thought it was going to be, because a lot of movies talk about mental health and use it as kind of a foundation to tell their story, but there's a lot that don't really do it that well or seem to hit on the same things a lot. Like everything's trauma in horror. So, how do we who's the best at articulating trauma versus what's just a entertaining movie about trauma? So without further ado, what's the first one on your list?
And I didn't really order these,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
I'll start with the other second sight release that was announced today, 2002's May, directed by Lucky McKee with Angela Bettis. And I don't even know specifically what some of these mental illnesses are, but it's clearly it's a film about someone who is very deranged and isn't looking to kill or to slake some kind of homicidal thirst. She's looking for a friend, and it's just the means of getting that friend just happens to involve body parts. It's almost like the modern drama equivalent of Frankenhooker,
Yeah.
or Frankenstein. And I remember Roger Ebert gave this 4 stars, and I couldn't believe it. It's actually, you should read the review. It's actually like, I know Siskel and Ebert hated horror movies, but like that, but they were too smart. Like when they got it, they got it. And Ebert absolutely got this. And he said, and I totally agree with him, that some people might laugh at the final shot, but he thought it was totally earned, and I thought it was totally earned too. And I feel like for a good amount of a large intention on Lucky McKee's part is making you earning that final moment, which would be totally dumb in any other movie. And it's just a character that you empathize with so much as she's doing these things. And it's just heartbreaking and also kind of visceral. There's some really squeamish moments, but just fantastic. So May
Yeah.
can
There's
own the 4K.
Yeah, we that's May is such a depressing movie because if you've ever not had friends before, you can immediately empathize with her situation. And there's a lot of social anxiety in that film, a lot of, kind of antisocial behavior problems. Like it does do a good job of creating a character that certainly struggles, but never actually goes out of its way to identify or name any specific kind of mental health disorder or challenges. And I think you just kind of get the sense, as you said, that this person's something's off, but not in a malicious way, just in kind of a they're just not adjusting. Like they might even she certainly portrays the character, she might even be on the spectrum, like as far as like just her way of recognizing and organizing things in the world. And what better muse relationship than Lucky McKee and Angela Bettis that happened like earlier. It's like the Mia Goth and Ty West of today.
For real.
Yeah, that's a good one. So one of mine was We Need to Talk About Kevin from 2011. And I don't know if you ever seen this one.
Yeah, I read the book too.
Oh,
It's
there's a book?
yeah, it's based on a book.
Huh.
Uh,
Well, good to know.
and then you realize the film is actually a very good adaptation. But if you think the film is unnerving, read the book. My God.
I mean, I don't have firsthand experience with an actual sociopath or psychopath, or at least not to my knowledge. So I can't really attest to, the hallmarks, but I watch enough true crime and read enough of true crime books to have a general sense that it does a pretty good job articulating how someone ends up becoming that kind of person. And it's downright chilling just when you see how cold the kid is and the struggle of, I mean, I don't have children, so I don't know what it's like to kind of have to reconcile the fact that I gave birth to a murderer kind of thing. But I can't imagine it's easy, and Tilda Swinton, as always, delivers. Um, so I just think that, and because it is very grounded in the way it presents the information and doesn't kind of go down the exploitative horror route necessarily, and I wouldn't even consider it a horror movie in full, but I think it's a horror movie, especially in consideration of today's context, where I think there might be more school shootings than there are like days in the year so far. So
Feels
um,
like
that's how we live in the U.S. These days. So um, I think it's just a really chilling movie that did a really good job portraying the absolute horror and uncomfortableness of having to reconcile a child being that deranged and that messed up, and how would a parent deal with that. Um, Hard movie to watch too. Just kind of just there's nothing good about it. There's nothing like redeemingly positive in any regard. So
mhm.
not, and I think it's safe to be saying that probably most of the movies on this list are not going to have some sort of redemption arc that leaves you with the positive, sunny feeling, because that's just kind of how most mental health is portrayed.
Yeah.
So that's
Huh.
mine. What's the next one on your list?
My next one is one of the best movies Ryan Reynolds has ever done, and it's the film that I knew he'd be a good Deadpool for. Is The Voices, directed by Marjan Satrapi, who wrote Persepolis. Have you seen it? The Voices?
Long time ago. I think before Ryan Reynolds has really like I think Van Wilder, because it came out around the same time as Van Wilder, didn't it?
Shortly after, yeah,
Yeah.
maybe 10 years ago. Just a great cast, just really, really dark comedy that does a good job of straddling like what the mentally ill person is seeing versus what's really happening. And just a great moment where like you see why he doesn't take his meds and what his world looks like when he does, which is like the truth. Um, and just it's a real window into the mind of someone who does those things and who doesn't want to be culpable or seem to be culpable, but you know that they are. And it just showed a good balance between the two. And Ryan Reynolds is great as someone who can't believe this is happening, you know, but it's happening and he's doing it even if he doesn't realize it.
Yeah, I need to rewatch this one. I remember liking it quite a bit when I saw it, but I couldn't tell you specific details from it aside from there's a bunch of, he's talking to heads
Yeah, and animals. But
and
yeah,
apples.
yeah.
My next one is Swallow from 2019.
Oh yeah, forgot about that one. That's a good one.
I forget what that specific ailment is called.
Picked, I think.
Yeah, it's
Pict.
picked pica is what it's called.
Pica. Yeah. Mhm.
And I remember there was a Shockwaves episode a long time ago where Rebecca talked about she had some, I don't know if it was her or something she experienced during pregnancy around pica.
Someone. Hmm.
But that movie, first of all, it's a very well made movie. Like just on a technical level, it's a beautiful movie to look at. It's kind of almost terrifying in its perfection and presentation of like this home life. But there are parts in that where I actually thought she was actually eating that shit. I don't know if she was or she wasn't, but it gets just and I think I stole this from a letterbox review, so I can't claim credit for it. But it's like someone wrote something to the effect of, "No one has ever made a marble look so delicious than that movie has." Um,
God.
and I don't know. I think it's a really good movie. It's also a really hard movie to watch because of how unique that particular like disorder is and how it escalates in such an uncomfortable way when she starts to eat things that shouldn't really be eating, that might do some damage on the way in. And it's very much about like it's kind of has a similarity to uh, when people often have, they say idle hands are the devil's playground. Well, what that really means is that people, when you don't give people something to do, they'll find things to do. And those things to do often require a need to either create some sort of center of attention to them, draw attention to themselves, or create excitement, or both. So in the case of my
Or like
uncle,
if you feel so repressed because you're not expected to do anything, but you still have a working mind, like, and you don't, maybe you don't want to be the prize racehorse of your husband's family, and maybe you don't want to be a broodmare, and and it just comes out in these subtle ways.
yeah, and it's just like, my uncle was married to a woman who was like shoplifting on the side, and like she didn't need to shoplift, but she did.
Yeah.
And she did it just because like she had nothing else to do and she wanted to do something dangerous and some attention, and so it's like there are these there's just so much of that is well done in that movie where you genuinely feel bad for the woman. I forget the actor's name.
Haley Bennett, who is a good actress in a lot of not so good movies, but who seems to be saying, please put me in something good. I can do it. And she can. And also from Christie, which is underrated.
Yeah, I mean, I think she just does a great job of showing up as like someone who genuinely feel for. And you also watch the slow descent into like boredom madness, which, if you've ever had cabin fever before, and you can definitely relate to how things start out great, but like on day 5 of the blizzard being stuck in your house, it gets a little tiring. Um,
Yeah.
Especially if you live in like a place like New York or LA where you may not have heaps of space to move around in.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Swallow, great
Mm-hmm.
film. Definitely does a good job of articulating what I don't have pica, but I imagine that looks pretty accurate.
Mm-hmm. My next one is Bubba Hotep.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
and not even really for Bruce Campbell, because, I mean, there's no real ambiguity there. Like, according to the world of the film, that is Elvis, and that's what happened. I mean, more Ossie Davis as JFK, or the man who says he's JFK. They dyed me black, and like that. That could have been like just a stupid sidekick, like one-off gag, but Ossie Davis like makes him a character and like shows how like he really does believe this and lives in that world. And it's like, oh wow, there's something here. I remember I took my friend to a screening at Alamo Draft House, um, and Don Coscarelli did an intro for it. And then we actually right after that, like that was 8 o'clock. Then at like 10 o'clock, we went to a screening of Satan's Little Helper with a Q&A with director Jeff Lee. that was a great night, and like Tim League was there. It was awesome. Um, but afterwards he said to me, "You told me this was a movie about Elvis fighting the mummy. I wasn't expecting pathos." I'm like, yeah, it's but it is. But I mean, honestly, even if you did look at it as like a guy who thinks he's Elvis fighting a mummy, Bruce Campbell still does a good job of someone who's at least a little nutty. But man, Ossie Davis is JFK. Like, it just works, and you really feel for him. This little
Yeah,
motorized feel. Yeah.
I fucking love that movie. Sebastian
Oh
Haff
yeah.
is the hero everybody needs in
Yeah.
their life. And I
For
think
real.
it still doesn't get enough credit for being as original and amazing. I believe it was based on a book, so I can't give Coscarelli the.
Yeah, I think it's based on a story by Joe R. Lansdale. But yeah,
But
yeah,
Coscarelli is quite good at adapting hard to adapt material. Like John dies at the end is another
yeah.
example of like something that you couldn't. I never read the book again, but our impression that I was under is that it's a very hard book to adapt. Um,
Mhm.
so Coscarelli is an unsung hero of horror and doesn't get enough credit. Mostly because it just probably isn't working as much. I don't know why, but someone give that man a fucking script to go direct.
For real.
Next up on mine is going to be Jacob's Ladder from 1990.
I
Uh,
still haven't seen it. I know the twist, but I still haven't seen it actually.
I don't have PTSD. I'm not a veteran, so I can't speak to that experience in particular. But what I can say is the hallucinatory aspect of like having that kind of trauma persist and how it shows up in your life could not be better done than it is in Jacob's Ladder because there's no point in that movie do you ever know what the fuck is actually like. If you as the viewer are just as confused about the boundaries of reality as the character is, then you have successfully created an environment where you have articulated what it might be like to live that existence. Where you're almost having like, even though the camera doesn't take a first person perspective, it does engross you in the same world in which what's his name?
Tim Robbins,
Tim Robbins
tall
characters
guy.
exist in. Yeah, tall guy. But and it's not even one of my favorite movies. A lot of people, give it a lot of praise. It's a good movie. The visuals are really, really outstanding, and it's in some ways not really a horror movie. In the sense of when it was released, there wasn't a lot of those kind of really trippy, heady, psychological thrillers. Maybe Altered States was another one, but even that was a little bit more psychedelic than it was trying to be accurate. But
Yeah, that was like truly made by a guy who's really gonna like flip you out. And there weren't a lot of those. Like he
John
was kind of
Borman is the uh, Alejandro Jodorowsky of is he British or American? I feel like he's British. John Borman.
British sounds right. Um, I forgot what I was gonna say, but
British. Yeah.
yeah, I know I have to see it. It's on
Yeah,
the list.
it's good. I think it's trippy. It's interesting. Definitely disorienting. Would not suggest taking any sort of edibles before watching it. But yeah, Jacob's Ladder.
No. My next one is the Babadook. Um, and there's not even really mental illness in this one, but the metaphor of the Babadook and well, like grief and like extreme stress and um, trauma, but just the metaphor of the Babadook and where it lands at the end, um, without ruining it. It's not simply just vanquishing a monster. I just thought was really brilliant. And yeah, that movie is appropriately lauded. Was recently on the last drive-in with Joe Bob, and still rules.
Yeah, the Babadook is definitely had one of the creepiest monster designs. I really wish I would have been able to pick up that book that they made, like a limited copies of, like the actual book.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
I actually had this on my list, but I thought, I had a lot. I have a big list for this because I feel like there's a lot of movies that do a pretty good job. Um, but I love the Babadook. I kind of hated it the first time I saw it because I really hated that kid. But then I watched it again. I'm like, that's the point. You're supposed to hate this kid.
Yeah,
Like you're
yeah.
not supposed to like him. You're supposed to be in that same headspace as the mom, just
He's
absolutely
the
fed
lead
up with
on
it.
the film. Yes, which is
The
what
Leah,
I love. Girl, that's another conversation. But I love girls so much, and it always used to bug me that no, you're supposed to hate her. She fucking sucks. She's trying to tell you she sucks. But anyway, um, yeah,
the
Babadook.
Babadook. Next one up on my list is going to be Relic from 2020. Did you
That
ever
was
see
my
this?
oh, that was my last one. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to save it then because we'll just talk about it at the end. So I'll move on to a different one. Um, I'm going to go with Hereditary
Mm,
because the way in which Tony Collette, and I will say this outright, I have not seen Beau is Afraid. I will see it at some point just because I'm curious. I
yeah.
don't think Ari Aster always lands the metaphor as well as people think he does, but in Hereditary, he absolutely fucking nails it. And I think it's less because of his scripting, which is important, but more because of Tony Collette's performance. And there is a scene in Hereditary that perfectly sums up, I think, what it feels like to be so angry at somebody that you have to love, but so upset with them that you don't know how to like you don't know how to reason that. This severe anger and disappointment in relation to this expected unconditional love that you're supposed to have. And that's the scene at the dinner table where she basically tells the son, "This is your fault." And does so in such a audacious way that you feel like you're being scolded through the screen, and it stings. And I think that the way that it just handles all the elements of grief, dealing with grief, the way it handles the implications of grief on others around you, and how it kind of shows up in different people at different times in different ways. And then the guilt that exists when something happens you could have prevented, and like this kind of how you live with yourself, knowing that whether you did something intentionally wrong or not, or whether mistakes were made, even though it's not really your fault, you still carry the shame of the blame. Um, I just think the performances in Hereditary do such a service to the metaphor, whereas without those performances, I don't know if that movie would be as good. Um,
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, even just the son just going home and going right up to bed is just you don't see that, but it's so true. And it just feels so believable. Like, yeah, like what if you're in shock, what else would you do? Like you totally get it. You're in his shoes.
yeah, and there's just so much dread in that movie. It doesn't, again, like most Ari Aster films, it does not stick the landing at all. It giraffe legs it. It just kind of fucking kind of gets
Mm,
there. It's probably his best ending the movies I've seen of his. So that for what that's worth, but 50% is still a failing grade, I guess. But um, yeah,
yeah.
I do, but I think that is one of the few times where the marketing actually valid. It was actually quite in line. Of course, removing the hyperbole of scariest movie ever made, because who the fuck is to say that? It's high subjective
Yeah.
opinion. But anyway, Hereditary, outstanding, which takes us to our agreed last one, Relic. So why did you pick Relic?
Hyams monster movie with the Cthulhu. Because one of us had to make that joke. But anyway, yeah, with Emily Mortimer and Bella Heathcote, I believe, from I always confuse her with someone else who looks just like her. But yeah, my grandmother had dementia for like the last 10 years of her life. And, I didn't have dementia, but the visual, the way it portrays dementia visually is astonishing. Like the when the granddaughter is, in she's in sort of a labyrinth, a normal looking labyrinth, by the end. Like I think I was like, oh fuck. Like this was a movie where I said, oh fuck, like out loud multiple times. Like I can't believe you used a visual language to nail that thought or that feeling. And not a big budget, but great performances, really impressive, and a fantastic ending.
Yeah.
Like highly, highly underrated.
Ending's an absolute banger. And you're totally spot on about the visual metaphor for dementia. And similarly, one of my grandmothers passed and got really late stage, like her dementia accelerated significantly over a short period of time. So she might have had it for some time, but then the last like 6 months of her life were just an exponential decline, basically, of her mind. And the abject terror that she ended up feeling at one point of just being in a place she didn't recognize, and that metaphor of the constantly changing house in her head with the walls getting smaller and darker and more confusing, it just totally puts you in a space of, wow, I even if I don't know, as long as you know what dementia is, you can understand that metaphor very clearly. And
Mm,
the fear that it imparts on, and then, similarly, the way it impacts the caregiver in this situation. There's not a
yeah.
lot of people that, if you've ever been around someone with dementia, especially when they're in their later stages, it's a
Mm,
really harrowing experience because you're looking at like someone wearing an Egger suit of someone but there's no one home, and they're not the same person, and it's a really jarring existential experience that is really terrifying. And I think that Relic just did a great job of creating that claustrophobia that must be felt for people that are slowly losing everything that they know and how to do.
mhm.
Um, and you're right, the ending is just it's in a way it's actually a kind of a, I don't want to call it sweet, but it's a far nicer ending than you would expect from the kind of movie it is. And it's almost
And
kind
it's
of,
so ambiguous a
yeah,
little bit.
no, it's definitely ambiguous, but like it's ambiguous enough where you don't have to go very far to draw a good connection. And it's
Mm,
not leaving you just hanging out to sea with no lifeboat or anything like that. It's definitely giving you enough to go with, but it is kind of like a sweet, for lack of a better term, conclusion.
yeah. Yeah, it's weird. I didn't know that. I mean, I don't want to say that it was lucky that she got it quickly towards the end, but I mean, because there's no luck in any of
No.
this. But like my grandmother, like she was like one of the most self-reliant people that any of us ever knew. Like if the zombie apocalypse had happened when I was a kid, we're going to grandma's. Like at 80 years old, she could like bend down and touch her toes. I can't do that now. And then, she got it, and it was like, because her body was so fortified and her mind went, it sort of took her body a while to follow her mind. So, I mean, the stuff you're talking about, like in late stages, that wasn't even late with my grandma. That was like, within a few, I mean, years, it was like bad, but she was still, hanging around for a while, and we took care of her. But like, yeah, it sucks. And it's like when you realize that there's no one home before other people realize there's no one home, and it's like you have to watch your loved ones come to that conclusion on their own, and you're like, this is going to suck for you as it sucked for me. um yeah,
It's
bummer.
it's a really, yeah, it's something I genuinely would not wish on anybody,
Mm-hmm.
to have to go through dementia or Alzheimer's because of just how the disassociation that occurs through the process, and watching someone slowly, it's like watching someone decay from the inside out.
Yeah.
And
But you can't see the inside. And even if you, and some people are still insistent on like, no, but that it's there. But yeah,
it's
it's,
just it's a tough thing to experience. And I thought Relic is, that's the part that always stuck with me, is like this film genuinely has something to say about this and isn't trying to exploit it. It isn't trying to turn it into some sort of monster. It's really just putting the focus on what's the experience of someone who's with somebody they care about who's watching this happen. And that's a perspective that isn't often represented when we talk about mental health and horror, because you're usually following the person who has the mental health condition. So you're trying to see the world through their eyes versus seeing it through the perspective of the observer who has to deal with this, and in and of itself can cause a lot of emotional pain and hurt, and it never happens to people that we don't care about. So it's like,
Yeah.
so it's unfortunate. And what I did want to flash up here as we're rounding out is, given it is Mental Health Awareness Month, I don't know what's available for, if anyone watches this outside of the US. I have no idea. But if you're in the US, there is, you can text 988. It's like the 911 for mental health services. There's a litany of different organizations out there that can assist people with any challenges they're facing. But there's also a ton of companies out there now that specialize in offering any flavor of therapy. And as someone who is in therapy, I cannot recommend it enough.
Yeah, everyone should be in therapy at some point in their lives. Everyone.
Yep. It is, there's no stigma in going to therapy, especially because, if nothing else, look at it as a way to have somebody who's objective in your life help you make sense of things without subjectivity, and provide a perspective that it's almost impossible to glean on one's own. So the challenge is finding the right provider, and that's the hard part. But I would encourage anyone out there who is struggling to try and seek some help somehow, whether it's through a phone line like this, or whether it's through, a professional like a therapist or psychiatrist or psychologist. But take care of yourselves. That's the important part. Because we're not here for a long time. We're here for a good time.
Hey.
Well, that rounds out this month. As always, I love doing these lists, Lowell. These are so much fun. I know we have June coming up, which is Pride Month, so perhaps we can incorporate that somehow. I know we have a list of things we've been thinking about, but anything else from you before we close this out?
Uh, Not really. I had a random idea for a movie not too long ago that I'll just share with you that probably will never get made, but it's basically Forrest Gump, but like Leatherface.
Huh.
Like Leatherface as Forrest Gump. And you have a voiceover that's like, and he never actually talks the whole thing, but it's just like, my name is Bubba Sawyer, and I was born in East Texas. And it's like the opening of Raising Arizona, of just him going to different relatives' houses. And those are the sequels to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But at the end, he becomes a vegetarian and learns to love. Something like that. Just something that ran through my brain. I thought you would appreciate. But
I just kept cutting. I mean, there's a lot that can be done with that. I think you might be onto something. Because it's
because
almost
it's not
like,
his fault. He was trying to make art when some dumbass kids wandered in and ruined his world.
it's true. It's true. They were trespassing, so shouldn't have been there. And in Texas nowadays, I'm sure they would get shot, and no one would care. Sadly, or yeah, we'll just leave it at sadly. But yeah, I think there's something to that idea, especially if you can do it over a longer stretch of time and superimpose this character into various historical events. Like, I was there in Jonestown, but like super macabre events, like Heaven's Gate, me and that guy, I don't forget his name, but shaking hands.
They wouldn't give me the Kool-Aid because they were mean.
My sneakers got messed up and I couldn't lay on the bed, but that's okay because I heard they drank some juice that put them all to sleep for good.
Yeah, I
Oh,
like it.
there's something
Anyway,
there. We
yeah.
will we will flesh this out over some period of time, and then come with a treatment. And we will use this platform to shout it to the world. But as we close out this episode, as always, take care of yourselves, be safe, stay cool, And above all, watch more horror movies.
Always.
Adios.
Peace.